Hi, it's David Heine. And today we're in Haarlem, just a little ways outside of Amsterdam, at the beautiful Frans Hals Museum. With us today is Michiel Kersten, who's going to tell us a little about the history of the museum and give us some insights. Michiel, maybe you could tell me first about the building itself.
The Frans Hals Museum is established in an old building which was built in the beginning of the 17th century as an old man's home, which had remained for almost 2 centuries. In the 19th century it was converted into an orphanage, which had remained until 1930. Then it was extensively refurbished, renewed, and became the Frans Hals Museum to house the municipal collections of Haarlem.
Now, Frans Hals never really lived here, did he?
He never lived in this building. He is, of course, a citizen of Haarlem. Originally, he came from Antwerp and emigrated at the end of the 16th century with his parents to Haarlem. And he became a member of the guild in Haarlem and one of the most renowned, most famous portrait painters of all times.
Now, the museum itself is more than just the Frans Hals paintings. What is the collection comprised of?
The collection is comprised of 17th and 18th century paintings and some late 16th century paintings. We call it the Museum of the Golden Age. It has paintings of all subjects which were painted in the 17th century. The landscapes, of course, still lifes, genre paintings of daily life. It gives one of the best collections of 17th century paintings in Holland.
Is it primarily Dutch and Flemish paintings?
It's only Dutch and Flemish paintings, especially Dutch, and more or less concentrated on painters active in Haarlem, who painted here the region, the dunes, the cityscape, the skyline, and of course in the city itself.
Oftentimes we think of Amsterdam in the Golden Age, but in fact Haarlem had quite a golden age. What was its prosperity here based on?
The prosperity of Haarlem was based on breweries and of course the linen industry. For linen you need both beer as well. You need clean, fresh water, which was available in huge quantities in the dunes, which was brought to Haarlem in boats along the canals and used here in the industry. But mostly it was the breweries and the linen industry.
Now, the sumptuous nature of this house belies its history as an orphanage. You've created some other elements here than just paintings, haven't you? Well, I mean, the furnishings and...
Yeah, what we try to recreate here is the atmosphere of a 17th century or partly 18th century building, which has been furnished with furniture, statues, clocks, and it tells you the whole history of how people lived in the houses in these centuries.
I've noticed that you have, at this point, flowers everywhere. What is that for?
Haarlem, of course, is in the middle of the bulb region, and tourists, people from abroad come to Haarlem and the region of what's called in Holland the Kennemerland, which is the bulb growing region, to look at the bulb fields. In spring we have always a huge show of flower arrangements, and what we choose to do is not modern flower arrangement but 17th century flower arrangements, how they did bouquets and festoons as we see behind us in the 17th century, and using almost exclusively historical varieties of tulips.
It was a very interesting painting we were talking about at the other end of the hall, having to do with the tulip trade itself. Could you tell me a little about that painting and the history of the tulip trade here in Holland?
Tulips were introduced in the Netherlands at the end of the 16th century. It was Clusius, a gardener who worked in Prague for the German emperor, who went to Holland, and he had a garden in Leiden as far as we can remember. And he introduced tulip bulbs in the Netherlands. And the fertile soil behind the dunes, which is called in Dutch geestgronde, which is a very peaty, sandy soil clay-like soil, which contains a lot of calcium, is tulips need this kind of soil to grow very well in. And the trade in tulip bulbs grew and grew, and it became a source of an object of speculation, just like the stock market is now. And this market, this is what we call in Holland the tulipomania. The market crashed in the 1630s. Tulips being worth more than 1,000 guilders crashed overnight to worthless objects. And of course there were satires painted on this foolish trade in the tulipomania in these tulips.
Yeah, I think the painting itself has some weavers and brewers following after this avarice wagon.
There's a sort of a wind wagon going along on the beach. Flora, the personification of the tulip trade, sitting in a stool, surrounded by fools wearing their fools' caps, and the craftsmen, the small people, following her in hope of gaining some fortune. Of course, decepted by the whole collapse of the tulip trade.
This is a rather large museum, actually. How many rooms do you have, and are they arranged in forms of subjects that follow some kind of course?
The Frans Hals Museum is one of the largest collections of 17th century paintings in the Netherlands, comparable in size and quantity to the Mauritshuis in The Hague. It has circa 20 rooms. The paintings are arranged in a thematical order. We start with the historical scenes based on histories from the Bible or mythological scenes. Then we have rooms with landscapes, rooms with still lifes, and of course rooms with portraits. The most interesting, of course, being the rooms with the civic guard portraits, the group portraits painted by Frans Hals in the 17th century.
Haarlem also had a lot of trade with Amsterdam being in close proximity. Was it a harbor? Is there a harbor here at all?
There's not a harbor in the proper sense as the harbor of Amsterdam. There was a lot of trade between Haarlem and Amsterdam, and the wealthy merchants, the wealthy tradesmen from Amsterdam lived in the surroundings of Haarlem. They created their own country houses around here, and a lot of wealth came from that. It's something like in the Vechtstreek, the region south of Amsterdam, where the merchants also build their country homes. But it has very sandy soil here and was ideal for country houses. And people escape the smelly atmosphere, busy atmosphere of Amsterdam in the summer for the calm of the dunes.
Haarlem has a kind of richness about it, it seems. And in these paintings by Frans Hals, he conveys the civic guard. Who exactly was the civic guard?
The civic guards were just normal persons in general, who kept order in the city and in the case of an attack could protect the city. The officers had served for a term of 3 to 4 years, and at the end of their term had as a farewell party their group portraits painted. The most popular painter for them was Frans Hals. His portraits are, when you see them, totally different from his contemporaries. His contemporaries were much more static. Their portraits don't seem to be alive. Frans Hals revolutionized group portrait painting by introducing diagonal compositions and by creating really lively persons that seem to be alive, persons that seem to be real, with real characters, different from their other paintings.
He does seem to create personalities even, that you can tell what this man was like almost when you look at him. And I find him, I think, some of the most exciting of the civic guards. They seem to like to get painted a lot. So when somebody, when somebody comes to the Frans Hals, what are your hours and when are you open?
The Frans Hals Museum is open 7 days a week, from 11 till 5, and on Sundays from 12 to 5. and this includes public holidays. The museum is also open from 12 to 5 o'clock.
Well, thank you very much, Michiel, for telling us about the Frans Hals.